guys good? Good? Yeah, okay. Third thing is prayer request. We'll have more, but I want to go ahead and read this before I forget. Danelle Marshall is being admitted to KDH with pancreatitis. So let's be in prayer for that. And we'll pray at the end. And we'll take other requests. I just wanted to do that before I forgot, because I might do that. Okay, so everybody had a lesson. We're picking up in John chapter 15. So, what's the setting? Where are we at in the timeline here? What's happening? So, what's happening?
They're on their way to Gethsemane.
Okay, so they are wrapping things up and moving on from the evening's events, which included the institution of the Lord's Supper, initiating his betrayal and leaving that time frame, the washing of the feet, all those different things we talk about. So we're in the last hours here. And so you can imagine Jesus knowing what he knows. Surely the disciples are sensing something, but maybe not. You know, there's been multiple attempts on Jesus' life, right? Time after time. But surely this feels a little different, but you can imagine from Jesus' perspective that he wants to share as much as he can in his last moments. You know, there's these things I want to tell you because before I go. And so John records for us here some pretty amazing things. So as Jesus walked along through the moonlit streets of Jerusalem, he continued to talk to his disciples. So it's like classes on the move here. They were on their way to Gethsemane, and this was Jesus' last opportunity to be alone with his disciples before his death. He still had many things to tell them, and some things he said as they walked along were unexpected. The last words of encouragement in the upper room were in keeping with a final farewell, but now he turned to an unexpected challenge in warning. The lives of his followers must bear fruit, and Jesus used the figure of a grapevine to make his point. So if you were teaching today, and you were going to use an example here in Indiana, and you were going to use an agricultural example, what might you reference? Soybeans? Or corn?
Pumpkin?
Soybeans and corn. I mean, that's like, just about anywhere you look, you're going to see cornfield or soybeans. In fact, it's pretty much, I wonder what they're going to grow there this year. Soybeans or corn. Occasionally, you'll see a little patch of tobacco. What's that?
Very seldom.
Very seldom, yeah. I mean, it's less and less frequent. But yes.
Solar fields.
I'm sorry, what?
Solar fields.
Solar fields? Don't get me started. And wind fields. What do you call them things?
Windmill.
Windmill fields. Bird harvesters. They kill lots of birds. Okay, so. Now, Jesus, in his day and age, if he was going to reference something agriculturally, what might he reference in where they're at? Grapes or olives. Things that grow, you have olives, or trees primarily, and then your grapevines. Have any of you ever been where there's been just like the hills are covered in vineyards?
Yeah.
What's it look like?
Beautiful.
It's beautiful country, right? And growing up, our yard was pretty neat. We had about an acre and a half, 2 acres, and I just thought everybody had, it was just, we weren't farmers or anything, but we had 5 apple trees, 4 peach trees, 2 pear trees that gave us 1 pear the whole time I was there. And lots of wasps.
A partridge in a pear tree.
And bees. Yeah, and a partridge. We had 2 cherry trees. We had a crabapple tree. And we had grapevines. We had grapes. Now, if you want to know what our grapes tasted like off the vine, if you just went up and picked one, out. The Ocean Spray cranberry grape drink tastes like our grapes. But the first time I took a drink, I was like, oh, this tastes like our grapes. Now, our grape jelly that Mom used to make is what that tastes like. And so we were familiar with the grapes and the vines and all that. We had fruit. Now, one by one, the trees would get. They were the ones that always took the weather. Apple trees eventually, the weather, lightning, and the cherry trees were the last to go. So now there's nothing there now. They're all gone. But anyhow, so in their culture, vineyards, olive groves, that kind of thing were everywhere. An important part of their economy, of their life. When we were blessed to be able to go to Hawaii, as Bart calls it, Hawaii. Anyway, once you hit a certain age, it's Cincinnati, Hawaii, Missouri. I don't know what the number is, but it's.
You better take some medication.
What's that? Bart did it, right? I suppose. So anyway.
You're going to blame something on the medicine and you're going to...
Well, anyway, they have a thing there called a kukui nut. And they make glaze out of them, but what I found out is they use that nut for everything. They used it for oil, light sources, skin, medicine. They use it for everything. Very similar to that is they use it for everything. And so it's a vibrant part of their life and their economy. And so when Jesus is teaching and bringing these things up, I mean, it's something as familiar as we are with corn and Hawaiians are with kukui nuts, they were with grapes and olives. I mean, it's that much a part of their life. And so Jesus, he teaches in verse 1 of chapter 15, he says, I am the true vine. They knew immediately what he was talking about. And my Father is the vine dresser. Does not bear fruit. He takes away, in every branch that bears fruit, he prunes it that it may bear more fruit. You are already clean because of the word which I have spoken to you. Abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself unless it abides in the vine, so neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me, and I in him, he bears much fruit. For apart from me, you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he is thrown away as a branch and dries up, and they gather them and cast them into the fire, and they are burned. If you abide in me and my words abide in you, ask whatever you wish, and it shall be done for you. By this is my Father glorified, that you bear much fruit, and so prove to be my disciples. Just as the Father has loved me, I have also loved you. Abide in my love. If you keep my commandments, you will abide in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commandments and abide in his love. To you that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be made full. Notice the relationship between these three words. Love, abide. What's the third one? See? It's that. Love, abide, and what was the third one? What's that? Joy. Oh, obedience. Obey. Wow. Love, obedience, and the idea of abiding. Notice the relationship there as it's written. It's interesting. You tie that also to 14:15. What's it say? If
You love me.
If you love me,
You will keep my commandments.
you will keep my commandments. And if you keep my commandments, that means you're abiding in me. And if you abide in me, you will bear much fruit. So love and abiding and obedience are all tied together here in the way that he's bringing all this together here. Now, for the Israelites, first approach to back in time. So, who made the first approach into the Promised Land amongst the Israelites who had been, who had left Egypt? The 12, right? And so, what did they find? A land flowing with milk and honey, and they spent quite a bit of time there and searching things out, and they brought back evidence. Some of that evidence was some really, really bountiful grapes. And as part of their report, the spies brought back a huge single cluster of grapes carried on a pole between two men. Now think about that. A single cluster of grapes carried on a pole between two men. That's right now, that would run you probably, I don't know, 100, 150 bucks. Grapes are expensive. They also brought back pomegranates and figs. The land of Israel continued to produce it as a symbol. Now, if we go back, this is pretty much in the culture and the economy for their entire existence as a people. And you can go back to the earliest cultures. It all centered around, in this area, the very similar agricultural things that goes way back into Egypt, into the Assyrians, the Babylonians, that area, that part of the world. It was always present and very important. And so the Old Testament prophets, as Israel was in the Promised Land now, and they're there, the prophets used this concept over and over to try the 12 tribes some lessons. Lessons which they didn't really get. They didn't heed. And so we see, for example, that Ezekiel, he wrote that disobedient Jerusalem would be destroyed like a useless vine. So this concept Jesus has used has been around for hundreds, if not thousands of years. And he's just continuing this teaching example. Isaiah taught that Israel was the vineyard of God, but it brought forth wild grapes instead of good ones. Now, our grapes were good grapes that we had. Now, the closest thing that I could experience to this was a little prank that played on me on one of the hog hunts. So this was, I remember what day it was. Is Glenn here? Yeah. Okay. It's the day that everybody walked. Some of us rode from park to park, but there was a lot of walking, miles of walking, in the heat of the day. Running the dogs, looking for hogs. They found one, and Glenn didn't have his gun. He was the one apparently supposed to shoot, but he didn't get the memo. So, well, anyway, sometime during that whole day, they were like, "Hey, Brian, eat this orange." And they threw it to me. It was you. So, I'm like, "Ooh, goody, an orange." That was the sourest, nastiest. It was beautiful. Took a big old bite out of that thing. Oh, it's terrible. Wild oranges are not. Did you think it's you on that too? Maybe that's why you left your gun in the truck. Yeah.
Kind of grew up in the middle of the woods.
Yeah, I remember that day. You remember that day?
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
I picked one up.
So he gave it to me, or Glenn, whoever. Yeah, call me. Yeah. Give it to Mikey. He'll eat anything.
I'll tell you what, the mangoes in Haiti is the same way. Well, they're so beautiful.
Yeah.
They're nasty.
But something's great. Yeah. So it has to. So the idea here is that if they're kind of wild or they're not grown properly or bred properly, or you know how you have certain seeds or ones that you can do that, like pumpkins, right? Some pumpkins you can make a pumpkin pie out of that are, and others no. And so these wild grapes are no good. And so Isaiah says, you're supposed to be the vineyard of God, bringing forth the good grapes, but you bring the wild grapes, which elders hand you and tell you to eat. I was just doing what I was told. Jeremiah announced that the nobles, Ezekiel, we have Isaiah, Jeremiah announced that the noble vine Israel had become degenerate. Hosea warned that judgment would come upon Israel, a selfish vine that produced fruit only for itself. That's an interesting concept. Jesus also used the figure of the vineyard. He warned of the fate of those who cared for a vineyard but refused to share the fruits with the owner. Think about that. You guys remember that? That's in Matthew 21. So what happened there? They didn't. The relationship with the owner wasn't. The owner sent messenger. What did they do to the messenger? And then finally he sent his son. Surely they'll listen to him. What did they do to him? Kill him. And of course that's picturing the prophets and then leading up to Jesus. So they even killed the owner's son when he was sent to the vineyard. Jesus' hearers gave their own answer as to what should be done to these husbandmen. That's a word that's used in the King James Version, husbandman. And in the NASB, which I was reading here, it was the vine dresser, right? Same. That's the parallel word there. They say unto him, he will miserably destroy those wicked men, and will let out his vineyard unto other husbandmen, vine dressers, which shall render him the fruits in their seasons. Well, that makes sense to us, right? Who are the other vine dressers or the other husbandmen? Yeah, look around. So this pictured the fate of a nation that did not bring forth the fruits expected of it. God would take away what he had entrusted to it and grant it to a people who would bring forth the fruits. Now in the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus taught that by their fruit you will recognize them. During the closing hours, these closing hours before his arrest, the immediate surroundings may have been introduced, the figure of the vine. So as they walked in the moonlight, it's dark, what might they have seen? Well, they might have been passing through the vineyards, the groves. And think about this. When they would, at the end of the day, after gathering up all the dry branches, they gather them together and then what do they do with them? They burn them. Might they, as they walk, and some of where they're going, it's lit with these, in these vineyards where these gathered branches are actually burning in that moment. That's highly possible. That's the scene. The house where Jesus and his disciples had kept the Passover may have had more than one vine growing on it, on its outside walls and around the windows of the upper room. Many of the homes had their own vines growing on them. Jesus may have noted them as they were leaving the house, or they may have walked through the temple area. The temple area, where there was a golden vine ornamented the entrance to the proud sanctuary that Herod had built. So there's a golden vine there that Herod, it says the temple had its doors also at the entrance, and lintels over them of the same height as the temple itself. They were adorned with embroidered veils, with flowers of purple and pillars interwoven. And over these, but under the cornices, was spread out a golden vine, with its clusters hanging down from a great height, the size and the workmanship of which was a surpassing sight to the spectators. Maybe that's what they saw as they were walking. Jesus may have drawn attention to these golden clusters as he walked through the temple area with his disciples. To reach the Mount of Olives, they passed over the Valley Kidron, where fires of vine prunings may have been burning. Vines may have been growing along the way. Then, too, they had just come from the upper room where the Lord's Supper had been instituted with its fruit of the these or several of these may have contributed to the vividness of Jesus' figure that he's using in this moment, right here and right now. Kind of puts you right in the moment, doesn't it? Now, as one travels the roads in Australia, that individual is struck by the fact that he's going through good fruit country. This is obvious because of the well-tended orchards and the heavy production of fruit on the trees. But a person will suddenly pass from a good section to the bush country that produces nothing worthwhile. Now here's what's interesting. One wonders about the difference. What's the difference between the bush country and basically there's no difference. These fields have the same good soil, the same amount of water and sun. But there is a difference, though. What makes the good fruit country? Healthy plants plus good care are needed, plus God's increase. But Jesus talks still more about the essentials. So the difference was the good plants and the care that is needed to maintain them versus that which is not maintained. So the essentials. In Jesus' instructions to his disciples, he was careful to tell them what would be essential to a productive life. He taught the lesson of the vine. First, the branch of the vine must bear fruit. Is that a negotiable?
No. Non-negotiable.
The branch must bear fruit, or it will be cut off and destroyed. But second, Jesus pointed out that to bear fruit, a branch must be joined to the vine. Makes sense? Now this is a neat concept. Togetherness provides nourishment and growth and ultimately the fruit. Fellowship with Jesus, fellowship with him is what provides the nourishment, the growth, and ultimately the fruit. And I would add, fellowship with God's people would also aid in that process. Ultimately, Jesus is the one that is providing these things, but it is, I would say, enhanced by the presence of other branches. Another essential for the lesson is that Jesus is the vine. Notice that he did not represent himself as the stalk or the stem, but the vine, the whole vine. The branches, the roots, the stalk, all of these are part of the vine, and his followers were the branches. This lesson remains true today. To be part of the good fruit country, the branches must be bearing fruit. And to bear fruit, the branches must be joined to Jesus. So the fundamental starting point of a branch being joined to Jesus is what? It's the whole process that's involved in what culminates in baptism. A trusting person in belief and trust and faith in Jesus Christ, repentant, confessing, immersed into Jesus Christ, is then connected to Him at that point. You cannot bear fruit if you're not connected. If you are not saved, can you bear fruit? No, it's logical, right? Now, Israel, the corrupt vine of old, has been replaced. Jesus is the true vine. Notice he said that. First words there in verse 1. He says, I am the true vine. Don't let that word slip by. Because we quote, it says right here, I am the vine, you are the branches. But notice at the very beginning, he says, I am the true vine. In him, Israel, including people of all nations, can find the real source of life and fruit. Those who become Christians and who remain in Christ or abide in him, as the King James Version has in John 15:4, are the Israel of God. Are you the Israel of God? Yeah. Now, the only way, how can a branch maintain its healthy, fruitful existence? Any of you here ever tended fruit-bearing trees or anything like that? It take a little bit of work?
Yeah,
Lots of work, right? Yeah, in order that somebody share with me your trials and travails. Fruit trees or something on the vine. Anybody here?
well,
I know Warren said, and then Keith, go ahead, Warren.
yeah, thin them,
You have to what?
thin the branches.
Thin them?
Thin them down, yeah, spray them, keep them sprayed and
Yeah.
cared for.
Yeah.
And even then that you may lose fruit for other reasons.
Sure.
But it's a lot of work.
That's a lot of work. You guys?
Yeah, you can do think you do everything right, also, all the fruit falls off the trees and you get nothing.
There's other factors that come into play too.
Yeah, a lot of frost and, like I said, thinning the trees out.
What are the chances of getting good fruit with no work?
None, or very little.
My great-grandmother used to take, she had a grapevine, and by the time she got done pruning it, I didn't think you'd have a grape next year, but
Yeah.
she did.
Yeah, we cut ours like all the way back every year. Like
There you go, but why are you doing that?
Yeah.
Wonderful.
just about, we would cut ours almost all the way back to the ground.
Yeah.
Well, the Father here is the gardener. Sometimes we feel that hardships are cutting us back so much that we cannot function at our best as followers of Christ. We've all experienced probably something in our lives like that we feel like He's pruning, working on me pretty hard. On the other hand, one must recognize that by this very pruning, the fruits of the branch are increased. Now, when we think about that, and then we think of verses like James that says, consider it pure joy, my brethren. When what? When you're tested, face persecution and trials and all sorts of things, consider pure joy. The only way that makes sense is that there's multiple things that make sense of it. One is, depending on the reason for the persecution or the trial, that it could be bringing glory to God, but it also is having its effect upon you as a person. Another example that is used in the scriptures that's not agricultural, it's metallurgy.
Gold and silver.
Yeah, that the metals are purified, and when they're heated up to the point when there's nothing but they're molten. What rises to the top? You know what it's called? Close? Dross. The dross comes to the top, and they have to get the dross off, and then what you're left with is what? Pure. And so there's many other scriptures and verses that work with this concept that Jesus is teaching here. Also in the book of Hebrews, it tells us that God disciplines those whom he loves, his children. Yeah, what father doesn't discipline his children, right? It's based in love, right? And so discipline. Now, when you're going through the refining fires or the pruning process, does it feel great? It can be very painful. It can be very painful. It can be difficult, hard, frustrating. But the good news is that it's all for a purpose. And ultimately here in this example is what? That you may bear fruit. Now, on the other hand, one must recognize that by this very pruning, the fruits of the branch are increased. Now, a minister brought 2 trees from the same lot. He gave one to his neighbor, and he and his neighbor planted the trees close to one another on opposite sides of the fence. The trees grew together. They were of the same age. They had the same water. They had the same sun. They had the same soil. But the minister noted that his neighbor had 2 or 3 times as much fruit as he had. The only difference he could discern was that his neighbor knew how to prune the tree and keep it cut back. The minister had no knowledge about such things, but he determined to learn from his neighbor for future improvement. So it had to do with the pruning. Even those who are bearing good fruit will find that God cleanses their lives and enables them to bear still more. The pruning may be painful, but the result is worth all the pain. Besides God's pruning, there is also man's work and attitude. 2 features stand out in Jesus' picture of this healthy branch. The branch that is bearing fruit had high regard for the Word and gained strength and guidance from its truths. The healthy branch also is the one who spends time in prayer. And through his communication with God, he maintains the oneness with Jesus Christ that is essential to life and vigor. Faithfulness in adherence and love of the Word and faithfulness to prayer, among other things, is the only way the branch can maintain his relationship to the vine. Now, the question that everybody wants to know. Who are the fruitless branches? Dum, dum, dum. Now, Jesus could have referred to the Jewish people, for they had failed to bring forth fruits worthy of the people of God. And they were in the process of something not so good. Yeah. We're literally, the wheels are turning in moments, and he's going to be taken away, and all the things that are going to happen over the next hours. He's going to be crucified. Not good. But the truth Jesus taught here was not confined to the first century. So, I do believe it's speaking of the Jewish people. In other places too, there's other scriptures that speak of that. In their role, but it's not the only thing it's speaking of. People still reject Jesus. And those that could abide in him. It's not in this example. He's speaking to those who would be his followers, and that they should abide in him. But there would be those that could choose, or that could choose by their own free will to not abide in the vine. If they don't choose to remain in the vine, then he says, my Father's going to cut you off. So this isn't confined only to the judgment that's talking about that would come for the Jewish people, the Jewish nation, and what they had done and are doing at this point. People still reject Jesus. They still fail to witness for Him. They still fail to render service that can be recognized as Christian fruit. Now, hear me on this. Hear me on this. Listen loud or closely, whatever. Listen. One failure does not mean that you are getting cut off. We've all probably had that moment where you're like, I think God gave me an opportunity here and I blew it. Well, you're done. No. Right? You're not cut off. You can need to be pruned in one area and still be bearing fruit in other areas of your life. We're talking about a branch that is bearing no fruit. There's nothing in their life that resembles fruit. Is witnessing a part of it? Sure. Is faithfulness to God's commands part of it? Sure. Is prayer part of it? Sure. Are all these different things part of it? Sure. These things that the fruit of the Spirit that's talked about in Galatians, love, joy, peace, patience. Everybody here perfectly patient? Anybody here ever lie? A failure in one area does not negate everything else. It means you need to work on that. But if there's nothing happening, then yeah, you're going to get cut off. You see what I'm saying? Are you with me? We all have our areas of improvement and areas where God's going to prune us and areas that where we sin and we fail. But that does not mean that we have completely removed ourselves from abiding in the vine. You still have faith and trust and are connected to Jesus, then you're good. One failure or two failures, complete failure or disconnection from Jesus, and yeah, you're going to get cut off. That's your choice. If nothing in your life resembles what Jesus wants, you have a problem. But if there are multiple areas of your life that are bearing fruit and others not, then guess what? You're a normal Christian. I think that describes all of us. There's nobody here that's the perfect branch, that's just loaded down with fruit and never has any problems, or never has any failures, or never has bad fruit, or that. There's nobody like that. So people still reject, they still fail to witness, they still fail to render service that can be recognized as Christian fruit. God is still pruning His vineyard. God recognizes people for what they are and removes the unfaithful. Their names may be carried on church rolls, but not in the book of life. Fruitless branches may deceive us, but the Lord knows those who are His. He is not deceived. He knows. Now, the pruning is not completed when the fruitless branches are removed. Those branches that bear fruit are also trimmed and shaped, disciplined, so that they will bear more fruit. For the Christian, this process is continual. Now, there's other Bible words that we use to describe this process that we are engaged in from the moment we become a Christian until the moment we die. And that's the process of personal holiness or sanctification. And so in this process of sanctification, we have, remember we talked about initial sanctification or initial holiness, or positional holiness. We're declared holy because of Christ's holiness and righteousness is given to us. It's imputed to us. but we're also called to involve ourselves in progressive sanctification. And as we involve ourselves in progressive sanctification, the Bible uses two words that talk about the way that we add the things of Jesus Christ. We are transformed into His likeness more and more as we add the things of Jesus to our lives. The other side of that is the concept of mortification, where we remove the things of this world from our lives, and it's a continual process of dying to self, dying to the world, and living in Christ and adding the things of Him. Progressive sanctification is summed up in transformation and mortification. You got all that?
Good.
A lot of shuns. And that's the process in which we're engaged our whole lives, and that's where the pruning comes in. God's like, hey, you need to get that out of your life. We need to remove this, prune it. Now, sometimes that may be something that you like. That you're like, wait a minute, so you're telling me this is something I need to remove from my life because it's ultimately holding me back as a Christian or in my faithfulness. And sometimes that's a relationship, that in a certain situation that, if you're running with friends that are pulling you in the wrong direction all the time, I think God's going to be like, maybe you shouldn't be running with them, unless you're the one who's affecting them rather than them affecting you, right? You have to figure out that balance, and the decisions you make and the things that you do and the places that you go and what you choose to in this world and all the things that are out there media-wise, what we consume and all that. So, a lot of things here that go into it. But the process is continual. The disciples to whom Jesus spoke had been pruned already. With 3 years of teaching, He had removed some of their worldly aspirations and some of their disregard for others so that they would be better fitted to produce the kind of fruit He desired. And that's an interesting thought. The whole time that Jesus is working with these guys, He's pruning and molding and shaping them, changing their worldview. This is the way you used to think. Now you're going to think this way, because when it comes time, you need to think this way in order to do the job I want you to do. Right? If they still held on to all their worldly things and the things that were part of their thinking and worldview prior to Jesus calling them as apostles, if they held on to all that, then they wouldn't be near as effective as they would be in the job that He had called them to do when it was time for them to do it. And the time for them to do it was coming up. Right? He'd been working and training and discipling and pruning them the whole time. You just get this idea of like, come on, we use the word knucklehead a lot. Knucklehead. You need to get this. You need to change this. You need to start changing your thinking. And you know that He was working with them in this process over and over again through this 3 years. You talk about getting pruned. Jesus, in the very words that He spoke to these guys, it changed them and transformed them along the way. That's what happens to us when we engage with His Word on a regular basis. It's the same thing, just a little different vehicle for the words to get to our ears. Right? They got to hear it with their own ears, which is pretty special, but we have no less than they did in this that He's given us to achieve the same purposes. Be renewed by the transforming of your mind. Cleansed. He said, you guys are cleansed. You guys are ready. Right? Remember what He said to them at the Last Supper? He said, you all are clean, but not all of you. But now He's gone to do His thing. But then He notes down here, He said that verse 3, you are already clean because of the word which I have spoken to you. They've listened and internalized it and taken heed of it. Cleansed and made ready to bear fruit. The disciples must remain in Jesus. They must remain in Jesus if they're going to do what they're going to do here over the next months and years, and even for the rest of their lives. They must be faithful to His person and His teaching, for it is impossible for the branches to bring forth fruit of themselves. They must receive the life and power from contact with the vine. Jesus had used many figures of speech referring to Himself. Let's think some of the figures of speech that He's used to refer, just here in John. What are some of them? You guys remember? He said, here, I'm the true vine. What else has He said?
I am the way, the truth.
The shepherd, good shepherd.
I am the way, the truth.
Way, the truth, and the life.
The gate.
The gate. Yep, I'm the gate. Yeah, same thing where He said He was the shepherd, the good shepherd. He's also the gate.
Light.
Light. Life and light.
I am the father of one.
Okay. That's not so much a metaphor. When we say I'm a door, I'm the gate, that's a good thing, but we're talking symbols and figures of speech. There's one, He said, I am the bread of life, right? I am the gate, I am the good shepherd. Here He said, I am the vine. To this He added, you are the branches. This refers to individual disciples, not the different.
And the resurrection and the life.
Resurrection and the life. Yep. Some take this to mean that I am the vine, you are the branches. That the branches are not individuals; they're groups. They use it to justify denominationalism. That this branch is this group, but I'm connected to Jesus. That this branch is this group connected to Jesus. And we're all part of that great vine. That's what they use this to justify denominationalism. Can we refute that thinking?
One church.
Well, it's one Lord, one faith, one baptism. It's one vine. We're all in Jesus. We're just different branches of that vine.
One thing, we're not bearing fruit, so you be pruned.
Okay? They would say they're bearing fruit. They got big buildings, lots of people, lots of money. Unified.
I was just gonna say one truth. I mean, we can all be wrong, but we can't all be right.
Okay? So go back to the thing I told you at the beginning. What are the three words that go together?
Abide.
Love.
Obey.
Abiding, and obedience. Okay. You're on the right track when you say, if this denomination says this about this, and the other one says, no, it's not that, it's this, and so you talk about that, what you just described there is what's called the law of non-contradiction. Right? There can't be multiple truths. There can't be multiple, right? Well, you're okay, you're right, is that your interpretation? So you're good, right? And we're good, and we're good, and we're always. We boil it down to one basic thing, we're just connected to Jesus. You can't be connected to Jesus, what did we say? Right. You can't be connected to Jesus unless what?
Unified.
How do you get connected to Jesus?
You abide in all His commandments.
How do you get connected to Jesus?
All His commandments through His plan of salvation.
Yeah, so if you have differing views about plan of salvation, you're not connected to, you cannot connect to Him if you're not saved. And if you're not saved, you can't say that I'm a part of the vine. And so it has to be obedience to the one truth. And so this is where things get a little uncomfortable and awkward, because I know every single one of us here have people that we love and care about that are in the denominational world. But I tell you this, if they believe that you're sprinkled as a baby and confirmed as a 10 or 12-year-old, you got a problem. It's not biblical. Not biblical. It's not obeying Jesus, is it? To come up with another gospel? What does Paul say about those who were teaching or accepting another gospel? In Galatians.
Let it be accursed.
Yeah, accursed, anathema, consigned to hell. This is uncomfortable. But there has to be a line in the sand. And here it is. And so to say that the branches are groups of people and that they're all connected, you cannot say that. Now, I am the vine, to this he added, you are the branches. This refers to individual disciples, not to different groups that would divide the unity of the church. That's what you were talking about there. That would divide the unity of the church into denominational segments. The union of Christ and his disciples is vital for the bearing of fruit. Now, when we get to the high priestly prayer, Jesus prays that he states that I and the Father are one, and prays for that kind of unity for his followers, so that the world may know that you sent me. The unity of believers, unity in truth, the unity of believers, Jesus says, would bring about knowledge that Jesus is the Christ. And so the flip side of that is the disunity of believers would destroy that message to some effect. That it would hurt the message of Jesus Christ. Does division hurt the message of Jesus Christ?
Yes.
It does. And it makes perfect sense. That's why Satan has splintered off this group and splintered off this group and splintered off that. He's been able to successfully divide time and again. And he's accomplished much good for his cause that way. So, if one remains in Jesus, this means that Jesus' teaching will remain in him. His whole being will be dedicated to doing Christ's will and accomplishing his purposes. His every prayer will be in accord with the will of God and the teaching and presence of Jesus. Besides, he will devote himself to the accomplishment of what he asked, and what he asked will be granted. Our greatest problem is in failing to trust God's promises and to do his will. All right, we're going to stop there. With what fruit? Questions, comments, thoughts?